Record. Okay. Welcome everyone to the first of our 2021 online print fair talks. Delighted to have Laura Slater with us today. Before we get started, my name is Charlotte. I run the public programme at the Hepworth, which involves all the fairs. So I'll be chairing the event today. So after Laura's finished her presentation, please type questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen and I will work through those at the end of the presentation. Do browse the exhibitor pages of our print fair if you haven't already. So we have 33 exhibitors, a whole range of different practices and different stages of their careers. And obviously it's a really important time to support independent artists and makers. So we're really pleased with the response so far and we hope to gather more interest in the fair as we go along. We'll be reopening the gallery on the 21st of May with our 10th anniversary exhibition, Barbara Hepworth, Art and Life. All of the galleries are going to be displaying works by Hepworth, so it's a really significant exhibition. I hope that we can welcome you into the gallery when things are allowed. Our online shop is open, selling a selection of prints that we have ourselves, as well as gifts and other items by a range of artists and makers. And the Hepworth Garden Cafe is also open for those of you who live locally and can come on your daily walk with another household and enjoy the garden designed by Tom Stewart Smith. So on with the event. I'm really pleased to host Laura Slater with us today. She's West Yorkshire based. We've worked with Laura in many ways over the years. She was actually one of the first artists that was stocked in our shop. She's a regular exhibitor at our fairs and it's been really great to see her career progress over the years, and she's doing really wonderful things, both commercial projects and individual creative projects, which she will be talking about today. So Laura's going to share her screen, and as I say throughout the talk, if anything comes into mind, then do type it into the question box at the bottom, and I'll hand over to you now, Laura.
All right, thanks Charlotte. Thank you to everybody for joining us. It's lovely to be chatting to you all and chatting through the Hepworth Print Fair. I'm going to share my screen now and get started, and hopefully everyone can see this okay. Is that okay, everybody? Hopefully. As Charlotte mentioned, my name's Laura Slater. I'm a West Yorkshire-based textile design practitioner. Oh, sorry about that. Flicking through. There we go. Sorry about that, guys. So I West Yorkshire-based textile design practitioner, and the focus of my practice is very much around image making, drawing methods, and using screen print not only as a production process, but also as an image making process as well. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that throughout the presentation, and about the most sort of recent, in the sort of last sort of 3 or 4 years, interest in using printmaking through both commercial production methods, but then also as a creative tool, and kind of my ideas and thoughts around that. So hopefully there's a bit of something for everybody in the chat today. So people often ask me where my creative career started, and although I don't want this to be an overly kind of gushing romanticised point in the presentation, what I want to talk about really is that having gone through my education, so my BA and my MA, and leaving school straight away at 16 and going on to study textiles straight away, I think although they were hugely important and pivotal moments in my career, the most influential aspect of my creative career was actually my childhood. And I think as we go on through the presentation, you'll see why it's probably quite relevant to chat about this, because I, as a child, didn't necessarily visit galleries very regularly with my family, but we had an incredibly creative home. So my family, my parents were not professionally creative, but they were incredibly creative in their own time. My mum was a maker and still is, you know, making all her own clothes. She made the clothes for myself and my sisters. And we spent a lot of our time going around mills, textile shops, markets, and she made so much stuff in our home. And likewise, my dad, who was a joiner in his own time, really. So we had this sort of very influential home that was full of collections and objects. And to me, that was almost like my kind of creative universe and area for play. I kind of was also really obsessed with drawing and painting. So we've got a drawing from one of my primary school books on the left-hand side of the screen, which I think only revisiting that during my MA, when I discussed the inheritance of creativity in my MA dissertation, did I start to actually realise the importance of the home environment and how much that would then go on to influence the way in which I practice now. So that's why this is there. Throughout my creative education, so I did my BA in textile design and I also did my MA in textile design. I became really interested in the relationship between design and art. And I think that I've always kind of struggled with the differentiation between the two ways of working. And in particular, I was interested in the way that artists produce textiles, so painters, a lot of the kind of mid-century artists, sculptors, painters, practitioners had a very kind of multidisciplinary approach to their work, and they often, really very often, would produce fabric designs and prints. And I was really interested in the artist being able to work in a design context and thinking about how the designer might be able to work in more of a conceptual and thoughtful approach to their practice as an artist. And these were just two key texts for me. And the Designer's Art book by Bruno Munari has actually become almost a design, art and design kind of theory staple now. You see it around quite a lot. And it was quite a pivotal kind of text. And there's this idea that when objects are used every day in the surroundings we live in have become in themselves a work of art, then we shall be able to say that we have achieved a balanced life. And again, just going back to that idea of the influence in my childhood, I think that's really important for me to think about how the objects that we surround ourselves with in our homes, the things we wear and the relationships we have with them are also this sort of, this kind of curated idea of who we are, and also this sense of, you know, we're almost like these kind of walking collages of our personalities and interests, and the relationships we have with these things really interest me. I'm just going to talk about very few exhibitions that more recently, so in the last 5 years, have really got me thinking much more about this idea of the connections between art and design. And this was an exhibition that I was lucky enough to visit at Modern Art Oxford, which was curated by Jeremy Deller and was about the connections between William Morris and Andy Warhol. And although they're not necessarily artists or craftspeople that I would particularly say have been hugely influential specifically to my work, this exhibition was really interesting for me because it talked about the idea of practicing as a designer or an artist and the difference between the studio and the factory. And again, my relationship with screen printing very much sort of discusses that, you know, a tool to make imagery and make creative works with that might talk about narrative or ideas, but then also this sort of production method that allows me to create everyday objects that people can have in their home. And this is just a really interesting reference point, and I kind of encourage you to maybe have a look, because there's still some really great information about this exhibition online. I think it's really interesting as well to think that William Morris also said, and this was in the 1800s, in the future, the best thing will be a mixture of the artist and the designer. And I think actually that art and design practice is moving more in that way, and those sort of categorizations of that is becoming changed, and it's growing, and they're morphing into the same thing. And I've done a lot of sort of practice-based research in thinking about how I can investigate and interrogate that, really. One of the other exhibitions that I saw in the last sort of few years was the Theatre of the Domestic at the ICA by Betty Woodman. And this show was huge, had a huge impact on me, mainly because Betty started out or was most known for her printmaking, but she was also a studio potter, and that transition of a practice moving towards more gallery context and thinking about the idea of the home, and the theatre of that, the drama of that, and that, again, that relationship with these objects that we surround ourselves with. And I don't mean that in an Instagram influencer materialistic way. I mean, maybe something that you found for 50p at a car boot sale that you love and you don't feel you can live without. And I think that's part of who I am as a person, and I collect things, and collections of things are very important. So I really liked the idea. I love the idea that the domestic can become part of the gallery, but I also love that the domestic can become the gallery, and visiting places like Kettle's Yard and seeing the collections of the Eads, and then also Charleston House, which is this living, breathing canvas of the Bloomsbury group, and these kind of collective of artists, painters, writers, and everything that embodies just really, really interests me. And again, informs that kind of interplay between my very commercial work and also my more kind of project-based work. So yeah, these are the things that I'm constantly sometimes battling with, often questioning, and thinking about in my own practice. So what is the difference between an artist and a designer, and how do I gain the balance between functioning as a studio and a factory, i.e. these sort of production methods that I go through to produce these sort of everyday objects. And I just wanted to sort of talk about that I am actually almost 15 years into my professional practice, so outside of education, which is very scary. But it's also to say that, you know, it's been a long time and build up between getting from where I started out to where I've got to. And these are just some of the companies, retailers, galleries that I've been very lucky to work with over the last sort of probably 5-6 years now. What's been interesting again is that interplay between working with galleries and their retail offers, but also working on very commercial projects as well. And that's something that I'm quite proud of, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of those projects now. So I work across textiles in lots of guises. I work across illustration, printmaking, so editioned prints. I work on interior textiles for soft furnishings, lighting. I've worked for accessories, and I've also worked for fashion. Some of those are produced in the studio, and some of them are produced by the companies that I work with. But I've really built up this kind of body of lots of different ways of working. And I wanted to kind of talk about one of the very first commercial projects that I did, which was for Heels, who were a British sort of design retail icon, I guess, in a way. And they had a really big affiliation with lots of textile designers and artists designed textiles in the mid-centuries. So for me, it was amazing to be able to be approached by Heels and work with them. And what was really interesting about this project, which was I think around 2012, was that Heels wanted me to come in and produce a limited edition range of a collection of patterns that I'd already kind of produced through my studio, through my kind of studio products, but they wanted them to read like editioned prints. So there were limited numbers. They even had little screen printed sort of edition numbers on the backs of the cushions. And I think at this time, particularly around sort of 2012, there was a lot of this idea of bigger retailers wanting to work with artisans and craftspeople. But thinking about how through their offer they could kind of capture this sort of special one-off arts kind of product, and that was really interesting to me as a project. So I've also worked more recently on collections for fashion, which was actually something that I did a lot more of in my education, but moved away from it coming out of education. And I was invited to produce 2, again, limited edition collections in collaboration with John Lewis. I think 2 years ago, we did 2 seasons. And this process was really amazing for me because it was very collaborative, to say that it was a kind of bigger retailer. But what it allowed me to do was to really think about the body as a canvas, and again to think about that idea of you know, an outfit becoming almost like a walking collage. And the thing that was really exciting for me about this project was that John Lewis were very brave in the direction that I took in terms of colour and scale and imagery for a very commercial high street audience. And they really allowed me to kind of push that idea as the kind of garment as a canvas. And that story was told by them, which was lovely, again, as a more kind of commercial retailer, about the process in which I developed the work, which was through these hand screen printing processes. A lot of it informed by kind of the work of Sonia Delaunay, who was a textile designer and colourist. And just this idea of mixing colours and the interplay and over kind of lapping of colour and shape and texture through the screen onto the canvas. And that was an amazing project for me to take part in. And sort of again kept me questioning that idea of, you know, how far can I push this kind of commercial application, and will this company take my hand and kind of run with me with it? And very luckily they did. And I wanted to talk about a project that launched I think last October, which was for IKEA Global. And this was a really interesting project for me because I had a lot of people questioning me over not my ethics, but my thoughts on how working with a company like IKEA, who are mass market, how that might impact on my brand. And the hand-produced textiles that I create in the studio and are of a much higher price point than IKEA. And it didn't take me any time to think about whether I wanted to work with IKEA, because for me, one of the things that I struggle with sometimes is that as a maker and as a screen printer, my work can be of a price that isn't that democratic and isn't that open to a wide range of people. And so I felt really, really excited that working alongside IKEA would allow me to produce designs that meant that I could reach a much wider audience, and that they would be sort of, they would be you know, a much more democratic and a much more accessible product for a different audience. And I think that's one of the things that I really love about printmaking, and one of the things that I think is so important about textiles is that textiles are around us every day, from again the home we have, the clothes we wear, and it's such an accessible tool, I think, to engage with design and in some cases art practice. And you only have to look at the painters who developed textiles and how and what their ideas were behind that. So that was kind of my thinking about this project. And I've worked with galleries along the way, which I'm really proud of, and I think to me gives an indication that there is that connection there of my practice dipping, or my design practice dipping its toe in painting and drawing methods, and sometimes sort of narrative as well. And this project was a project that I did for Tate, so an art gallery. And what was interesting about this project was, although it was for an art gallery in a gallery kind of context in some respects, it was actually my biggest project in terms of manufacture and production that I have ever done to date. So I was asked to produce a range of hand screen printed leather accessories. So they wanted them to be made in our studio, which they were. And they were developed from the architecture from the new Switch House extension. So the image making and this kind of collage aesthetic was looking at the sort of architectural forms and textures within that that new extension and building, and was sort of developed for this pattern. But this project, because of the volumes of products that we had to produce, and also the process of working with new materials, so thinking about working on leather and with different inks and screens and all sorts of different things, we had to put a full production schedule together to meet our deadline. And so this again was just a different way of thinking about screen printing as a production process, and what kind of my capabilities were, I guess, as a factory. And I just wanted to put this in, actually, which is a project that's quite close to my heart and a more recent project for me, and that's with a local, well, I say independent, but they're actually a national brewery, Northern Monk. And what's been really lovely about working with Northern Monk is they've asked me to be and have a series of patrons, so people that they work with, to produce imagery for their artwork for their cans. So they do limited edition brews of ales and all sorts of delicious things. But to me, there's nothing, I don't think, that's more democratic and more accessible as art on a can of beer. And I think the project has allowed me to really push more illustrative approaches to my work, and thinking about things like how I can create imagery that documents things like taste and flavour and ingredients, which is something I've never done before. And it's opened up such a diverse audience to me. And I just feel that, you know, kind of pubs and working with more kind of local companies is just a really kind of great way to think about community, which is something else that's very important in my work. So that's all the kind of commercial stuff. But there's also this other side of me that believes in the fact that textiles are loaded cultural objects. You know, we know this from, again, all the things that, and all the ways in which we engage with textiles, and we may take them for granted. And I think the thing with textiles is that it can sometimes have very kind of domestic connotations, but not for necessarily the right reasons. But I really believe that textiles are a vehicle, and they often reflect the people that made them, or a moment in time. It might be an era, or a part of history, or a part of someone's personal history. And that not all these stories are told, because we might see them, for example, applied to a lampshade or applied to a cushion, which sort of seems maybe in some respects to undermine that. But that's why doing talks like this is great, because you get to talk about the ideas behind the work. So I'm going to share with you now some of the more project and kind of concept-based work that I've worked on more latterly, and this project was again one that really kick-started my thinking about this idea of the studio and the factory. And this was a collaborative project between myself and Fraser Mugridge, who's a graphic designer based in London, who also does an awful lot of work with galleries in terms of graphic design for gallery context. And this was an installation, an intervention in an exhibition space at the Art House in Wakefield, which is where I had my first studio. And this project was to create an intervention in the gallery space that referenced an exhibition that happened in Wakefield called Wakefield Fine Art and Industrial. So again, it was very up my street in terms of the content of the exhibition. And this exhibition was 150 years ago. Well, it's probably 155 years ago now. And what it was an exhibition in Wakefield to celebrate both the industry, but also the creative work of the community. So alongside sort of things that were produced in through industrial means, so things like hand-carved bricks, I can't even think what else was there, but things like, toilets and these very sort of industrially manufactured items, everyday items. There was also work of hobbyists, women and children, God forbid. And what we needed to create we decided that we wanted to create this idea of a wallpaper. And we liked the idea that the wallpaper is, again, this very domestic kind of product application. But we wanted to think about how we could do it in a way that made it less about repeat and manufacture and more about the kind of creative process of producing this wallpaper. And what we did is we took the entry tickets, which you can see on the sort of bottom side of the screen there, and we looked at the colours in those, and we looked at the typeface, and we looked at some of the key context of the exhibition. And we created, I think it was 360 metres of wallpaper in 5 days, using the photocopier, using mono printing, and using the silk screen as our image making tool. And that was just an incredible process for me. One, to sort of work alongside Fraser, who's got just an amazing kind of knowledge base, but also just to work on this really fast-paced kind of outcome that was underpinned by all this kind of content and concept. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the fact that as a designer, what I find, and probably, for people that work more as visual artists, is that I find it very difficult to put time aside for research and development, to move my actual studio practice forward, because you can get caught up in the everyday of working to briefs and working for people and working on commercial production. And so in 2017, I applied for a residency at a place called Cove Park. which is in Argyll and Bute in Scotland. It's on the side of Loch Long, which is just an amazing space. And if you look very closely in the top right hand corner of the screen, you can see the location that I was based at there. And what's great about Cove Park is they actually offer residencies for craftspeople, which is actually very, very rare. And that residency was all about me exploring new ways of working and being in a new place and thinking about that, how that might impact on my work. And so I spent 5 weeks in the little green, the grass-topped hut at Cove Park. And what I did whilst I was there is I completely explored the silkscreen as a drawing tool. So I spent a lot of time walking, I spent a lot of time outside, I even screen printed outside. For those of you that are familiar with screen printing, you often work with photographic equipment and technology to expose drawings or artworks onto the screen. But the process that I was using was by hand drawing and painting directly onto the screen, and very much inspired by my kind of surroundings. So I was looking at pushing new colour within my work. I was looking at the screen as a drawing tool rather than a manufacturing tool. And I was also working at really, really big scale, which probably isn't kind of coming across within these slides, but I was working, you know, at a massive scale within the studio, and thinking about that as a new way of working, and the cloth as a canvas. And from that project came an in-house collection, if you like, so a studio collection called Land. And I found that there was such a huge amount of kind of creative power in immersing myself in the landscape. And I think actually having spent so much time at the Hepworth, and, you know, being inspired by a lot of artists like the St Ives artists, and painting in particular, painting practice, the landscape was something that I'd always really wanted to get my kind of teeth into. And so this sort of the outcome of the Cove Park residency was this sort of body of large scale drawing and printmaking, and just the time to be able to immerse myself in that really kind of came through in this kind of collection, which has been, you know, really well received. And I think, you know, the authenticity of the experience of making that has meant that this project and this collection of fabric designs is really engaging people. So time was very important for this kind of part in my practice. And it also led on to other projects that still to this day kind of blow my mind that I've done these things. But what I wanted to do, or what I usually do each year, is I would showcase my commercial work and studio collections at London Design Festival, which happens in September. But because Cove Park had been more about thinking about the context of the work, I didn't want to go to London Design Festival and just show products. I wanted to show the narrative behind them, the things that had inspired them. And I teamed up in collaboration with Zosha Lewis Berchietta, who is the Plant Room. She's a Leeds-based botanical designer, and we created this quite modest indoor space, this pocket garden to hang the fabrics in, and we used plants that were kind of native to Cove Park, and the loch that I'd spent so much time on, and we really wanted to engage people with some of the experiences that I'd had. So we were kind of creating these sort of areas where people could come and actually sit and draw themselves. we worked with other practitioners, so we worked with a sound artist, and we also worked with Essence and Alchemy, all Yorkshire-based practitioners, to create these sort of installations. We had Scent as well, which was done by Essence and Alchemy, and it was just about this sort of immersive experience, and again taking things that you might not expect from the outside into an interior space. So again, that maybe that idea about bringing the garden inside, and you know, the garden and the home and the exhibition space. So it was a really interesting project to explore and experiment with, and it was really well received. It was so well received, in fact, that we were invited by the Royal Horticultural Society to take a space at Chelsea Flower Show, which was mind-blowing. I think we got this opportunity in the September, and by the April we had raised funds, got sponsorship for Japanese timber. We we worked with interior architects to do kind of schematic drawings for us. We designed a planting scheme, and we actually built upscaled our land installation from Chelsea into this sort of amazing kind of pavilion. And it was about inviting people in. So the thing about Chelsea Flower Show is that it's absolutely mad with people and busyness and hustle bustle, and we got put up on this lovely hill which looked over all of that, and people would just find us if they found us, and they'd come and they would sit within the space, again, to draw, to take time out, to immerse themselves in the landscape, and to look at the patterns that were, and the designs and the drawings that were created at Cove Park. Again, we collaborated with loads of different Yorkshire companies or designers on this, from graphic designers, the Archipelago, to Galvin Brothers, furniture makers. Again, we had smell and we had scent and we had sound, and it was just a really amazing achievement for us, and something of which, again, just that kind of taking the textiles into a different context really told kind of that story of my experience at Cove Park. So I'm going to go on to talk about sort of my most recent project, and this is kind of the last thing I'm going to round up with, really, but it's a little bit of there's quite a lot of detail. So this is at this stage, what I was starting to realise was that I was really interested in, well, what makes a designer, and what makes an artist, and what are the nuances and differences of that, and is there a difference? I also wanted to think about making new works that explored the idea of making art for the everyday, which again is a very kind of bandied about term, but that's something, again, that's very close to me. How my work maybe even interest people in going to look at, you know, textiles in a gallery, for example, and is it sort of a gateway or a bridge to doing those things? And thinking about more of how I can explore process as a means of design as well as production. And this project was a collaborative project that I managed to secure Arts Council funding for, alongside a visual artist called Moena Qatar, who is London-based. I met Moena in 2017, and I worked with her as a mentor and collaborator for a project that she was doing for London Design Festival. And Moena is an artist who explores textiles and ceramics as a tool to sort of tell her story, which is all around kind of the social fabric of people. It's about her family, it's about her Ghanaian heritage, it's about her voice as a visual artist, and thinking about how she could bring all those things together through these sort of immersive experiences. So as soon as I met Moena, aside from being absolutely amazed by her image making processes, I just felt like I just really wanted to work with her. I really needed to work with her. And it turned into this really amazing project, and it started by visiting two archives. So we visited the Whitworth Wallpaper and Textile Archive, which, for those of you, if you're interested in textile and wallpaper, I think it's one of the biggest in the country. It's an incredible resource. And we also visited the Cloth Workers Centre at the V&A as well, which is again an incredible resource. And what we did was we worked together to select works that were created by artists. So Henry Moore has a huge collection of textile prints, which again is something, if you've not seen, you should check out. Keith Vaughan, one of my favourite painters, again explored lots of woven fabrics, and these were all produced and manufactured for the home. And I'm quite ashamed to say, actually, that in 15 years, aside from seeing these things sort of in the flesh through glass in museums or in galleries, this was the first time that I'd gone to an archive and worked with the curator and been able to get really closely into seeing these fabrics, and the amazing moment when the fabrics were actually rolled into the viewing rooms on rolls and not these tiny little swatches that you see in reference books. And you know, I think it was quite an overwhelming moment. And what we did was we selected artists who had inspired us within the museum collection and archives, and one of which was Althea Mcnish, who was actually one of the first sort of acknowledged Black British textile designers. Studied at the RCA. She actually passed away, I think, last year, very sadly. But what we really loved about Althea's work was just this sort of sense of place within it. And, you know, she was from Trinidad sort of originally, and was really interested in kind of colour and image making, but through kind of abstract form and creating this sense of where she was from. And again, getting to see these unfortunately not being able to touch them, but getting to see these fabrics close up was just an incredible moment. We also identified Nikki de Saint Phal as an interesting reference point for us, again because of her image making and this idea that Nikki de Saint Phal used the term nana within a work to talk about these sort of female forms and figures, a nana of which is just a close sort of word to my heart. And again, all these female family influences on both myself and Moena were really important. And Nikki de Saint Phal, even though she was a sculptor, had produced these are actually wallpapers. I mean, can you imagine having these on your wall at home? And these were put into sort of production, and it just blew my mind again that an artist could produce something and then that could be in the home. And thinking about that, I think we also like Nikki de Saint Phal because she'd gone through non-traditional routes to a practice, so she wasn't a trained artist, so she came through her own routes to practice, which really inspired us. So we identified and selected key works by people who we thought were maybe underrepresented. We wanted to also, within the project, promote the use of museum collections and archives, because there's an amazing resource out there for people to tap into, but also to create new work from. And we also wanted to discuss that idea of, okay, how can Moena as a visual artist make work that it has a design context, and how could I make work that had more visual art kind of relevance? So we started creating imagery together, and this process was all about our shared drawing process. So sometimes we'd work together in Moena's studio in London, and sometimes we'd work together in my studio in Leeds. And we liked this conversation between our image making and our drawing aesthetics and our handwriting. We produced all our artworks and drawings in black and white, so it was ready for screen print to expose onto screens. And we talked a lot about what images we would use and why, and we talked about the key tools that we have as artists and designers, and what were our shared tools and connected us as a designer and a visual artist, Moena. And we decided that it came down to our hands for making and our eyes for looking, which sounds so basic, but you know, they're the things that make us see things in the way we see things, and you know, the way in which things come from us, either you know, on a canvas or in a sketchbook. And we created really, we're both quite prolific when it comes to drawing. We've created hundreds of drawings, hundreds of kind of motifs and icons. And we went through this very analog process of collaging our shared images together and working to develop very large scale, actual scale screen prints that may be used for product, but may also, or could be used or viewed in the gallery context. And we did this over a period of a year. And, you know, we worked together to sort of digitize some of those things, to realize our approach to color and how that would kind of develop not only on screen, but we also went through the process of developing the imagery directly on the cloth. So we created colour separations, but then we went back in and we masked sections and areas out. And it was all about sort of us really, and our relationship together as a designer and a visual artist, and also about these images, these icons. We also produced very large scale A0 editioned prints. We editioned things small initially and then scaled them up, but these were all, we'd create one layer and we'd screen print it, and then we'd get tracing paper and draw into it, and then we'd expose it, and then we'd screen print it. So it was just this ongoing dialogue between us and the screen as a drawing tool, and it made for kind of very vibrant work. We wanted to look at the figure also to represent both ourselves and the people that had sort of inspired us, either the artists in the collections and archives or our families and our family kind of iconography. And we both produced our own works within this as well. So I produced pure fabrics that may be hung in a gallery context, or also used to make things. And then Moena also produced garments. She loves clothes, and there's this lovely story that Moena goes to Brixton Market very often and uses and gets sort of African waxcloth fabrics, and she will send them over to her aunties in Ghana, who will then make these outfits for her and then post them back. And we loved, again, that kind of collaborative approach to making things. And we put together an exhibition which was in Colours May Vary, which is an incredible bookshop and gallery space in Leeds. And why we liked Colours May Vary is because, again, they've got that interplay between, okay, they've got an exhibition space, but then they have product. And so it just felt for a really inclusive environment to show the work just as pieces in their own right, but also we also developed some product as well. So moving on from, and I am on my last couple of slides now, I know I'm a tiny bit over time, but we went on from the show at Colours May Vary. We wanted to show both in Yorkshire as my home, and we wanted to show in London as Moenna's home. And we actually showed at Crafts Council Collect, which is a national an annual exhibition that shows craft that might be functional, but it also might be non-functional, and it's curated and selected by the Crafts Council. And Moenna and myself sort of rehung really the work that we produced as part of II, our collaborative project. And we also showed, I'll just go back, we also showed Moenna's large scale ceramic pieces, again, influenced by the ceramics she's surrounded with in her home, and images that are derived from kind of family iconography and textiles. And I think one of the things that came out of the project, and this was literally just before lockdown actually last year, was that during the show we were approached by the V&A, who do actually regularly visit the show to think about things that they might want to collect for their collections and their archives. And two of our works were actually bought by the V&A and are now housed at the Cloth Workers Centre and their textile archives, which was something that was just, again, very overwhelming. Something that I'd always wanted to sort of personally achieve, perhaps, and tick off my box, but more than tick off my list, but more than anything, I think that it sort of referenced the things that I've been talking about over and over in this talk, is that, you know, a museum has collected a piece of our collaborative work as a work of relevance. And to think that even if it's only one piece of our work, well, Moenna's got lots of working collections actually, but I don't, one piece of my work that sits alongside some of those works that have influenced me so much in the collections, and that somebody might look at it one day and think about the context of it, then I think that I could be totally happy with that as the pinnacle of my practice. So that's it. I hope it's been interesting. I've probably repeated myself an awful lot, and I'm really happy if you've got any questions or things that I've maybe not gone through. But yeah, this is me. If you want to find out a little bit more about my projects or my more commercial work, you can follow me or visit my website as well. So yeah, thank you everyone. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Laura. That was incredible. We've got lots of praise and comments coming through about how inspiring the talk has been. Practice, collaborative ethos and ideas are all really inspiring. So I'd just like to echo that. I completely agree. What an in-depth talk and a really broad practice. It's great as well for us to work with contemporary artists, designers, makers. Obviously, Barbara Hepworth was working at a time, modernism, where people were coming together, working through fine art, theatre, textiles, you know, architecture, and all these kind of practices would operate kind of interchangeably at the same time. And then perhaps over the years has become more compartmentalized in the way, you know, way things are taught. And I think, so it's great to kind of continue that discussion in terms of where the boundaries of all these practices lie. So I'm just going to work through some of the questions, some of which are more general, kind of about the practice, and some of which are quite specific. Oh, comments are coming in so thick and fast. So
I can't see any of them.
Oh, really? Well, if you go into this Q&A and then there's also chat, maybe you can't see.
Oh, maybe I'm not in the chat.
Okay, well, anyway, so I'll start with Sophie, who says, your use of colour is amazing. Can you talk through which colours you're drawn to and how you pick and mix certain colours together?
Yeah. Well, I have to work quite hard with colour actually, because I do have a natural hand, and I think quite a lot of designers maybe particularly have almost like this inbuilt palette. And so I have to be quite careful about pushing colour forward. I'm not afraid of colour. And I usually start with actually maybe a concept board for colour. So I would kind of collate and curate, you know, inspirational imagery, which might be from painting, it might be from film stills, it might be from photography, and then I'll either sort of mix colour by hand, or I might even sort of digitize that and use Photoshop to pick colour out. But I always usually start a project with identifying a colour palette, because if I don't, I'll just go all over the place with it. I think sometimes when you're working to brief, people give you the colour palette to work with, which is good for me actually in some ways, because it pushes me in new directions. But I think I kind of collect the colour, and then I also think about how it's used in different kind of colour proportions. So I think about, say, if you've got a palette of 6 colours, then, you know, say if you've got a violet and a cobalt blue, how different using those colours in different proportions can make either an artwork or a design feel. And I do test that out quite a lot, and I try and vary colour across new projects, but then I also try and have it sit in with my sort of general aesthetic. So it's a bit of both, but it's sort of hand and then sort of digital colour, I guess, in a way.
Great, thank you. And on another kind of practical question, Pauline just wondered what the process of painting on a screen was like, and how you
yeah, so there's different ways that you can do it. So a lot of the work that I did at Cove Park was using like a manual, almost like an emulsion. So it's called screen filler and drawing fluid. And it's great because if you really explore different tools to make with, as long as they're not sharp and going to kind of pierce your screen, you can just build up the layers. So you can keep the screen quite open, and you can block areas of the screen out, and you paint it on with a paintbrush, or you can stipple it on with a sponge, or you can flick it on, or you can throw it on. I was pouring it on at times. And what it does is it hardens, it dries onto the screen, but you get these really amazing sort of handmade marks. You can also just put ink directly onto a screen and pull either a binder, if you're working with textiles, through it, or you can pull through like a screen printing medium for paper, and that acts more as a monoprint. So you'll never get the same again with that process. But with the screen filler and drawing fluid, you can repeat it and paint into it and paint bits out and add bits in and mask things out. So it's very intuitive, like painting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful. We've had a few people asking about names and titles of books. So what I've suggested is I can maybe send a list out afterwards.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Slides if you're happy with that.
Yeah, no, of course, I'm more than happy to share the slides. I did see somebody's asked Mowena's surname. It's Mowena Kattah, Kattah.
Brilliant. So yeah, someone would like to say, no, for an aspiring designer, you've been part of many commercial projects. How do these tend to come about? And later on, someone's asked what advice you would give for people looking for companies to collaborate with.
Okay. I think when you're kind of starting out, one of the most important things that you can do to sort of gain attention, let's say, from people, is that it's all about the consistency and quality of your work and presenting your work. And that can be through very accessible channels. So although I think there are lots of challenging things, let's say, about social media. As a designer, it can be a really helpful tool to gain the audience that you might want to see your work. So for example, the Heels project, which was the first biggest sort of project that I did, came through people seeing my work on Instagram. And, you know, that regularity and that consistency of this is what I do and this is how I do it. I'm a maker, I'm a screen printer, and a clear voice about what you do is really important. And then also the John Lewis project, which was quite interesting to me, actually came through Pinterest, right, which I don't show huge amounts of work on Pinterest. I try to use libraries and books as much as I can to research or visit exhibitions, but I do have an interest in fashion, and I was pinning a lot of fashion. Again, I kind of see it as like a walking collage, and John Lewis saw what I was pinning on there and were like, you pin everything that we pin. Our aesthetic for print and garment shape is the same. Could we work together?
Wow.
But I do think it's about keeping going, keeping making work, keeping things consistent, and sort of putting things out there and not being too afraid to do that. And, you know, relationships with people. So, you know, professional relationships often become friendships. And working hard and being sort of personally accessible and being friendly or saying hello to people and reaching out to people is, you know, and social media is really helpful for that as well.
Brilliant. Somebody has asked how you develop your mark making, and another person has asked about the influence of flowers and leaves and botanical influence upon the mark making. So maybe those two questions can come
yeah, combined, yeah, of course. I think mark making's I laugh about mark making because I often say you need to worry about yourself when you're walking through any shop, i.e. the pound shop, and thinking, I wonder whether I could make a mark with that. And I think it's sort of just about pushing your tools and making tools as well. When I was at Cove, I know it sounds a bit kind of, but when I was at Cove, I was like collecting things and taking rubbings and, you know, making paint brushes from, you know, wildflowers and plants and exploring things, cutting things up, looking at what you've got at home, what kind of mark does a brush make if you dip it in ink. And I think the other thing about mark making is it's not just about your tool, but it's about your physicality. So I often think about, you know, if you make a slow mark or a fast mark or an aggressive mark or a gentle mark, you know, and sometimes I'll just strip it back and go, no, I just want to use a paintbrush as well. But I think with the floral thing, it's quite interesting because sometimes I get quite conscious being a textile designer and thinking about textiles being and florals being such a staple of textile design. You know, they're kind of the equivalent of the polka dot or the check or the stripe, aren't they? But to me, they are inherent, and they're like, it's like a still life to me. It's sort of, there is that need for those natural forms and for us to see them, and we, you know, people engage with designs that they can sort of recognize motifs from. But I think it's also nice to think about how you could reinterpret the idea of the floral and that become maybe slightly more abstract or semi-abstract. And so just kind of like playing with textiles to inspire textiles. Yeah, I've been doing a lot of reading recently as well. So, you know, kind of Sylvia Plath poems and looking at different kind of people's homes and collections and gardens and artists' gardens and things like that. It's been quite inspirational.
Wonderful, thank you. Lots and lots of people just saying how inspiring they found it.
Oh, thank you, everybody.
Someone is about to finish their major project. and would like to ask how you would approach a new brief.
How would approach a new brief?
I suppose you've kind of touched upon that in many ways.
Yeah, I guess it's sort of, it depends really. If it's my own studio brief, then I only have to answer to myself. But it's usually an idea or a narrative that I would work with a studio brief, my self-directed studio brief, and then with a commercial project, it would be more visually led and aesthetic led. So I guess that's sort of the difference, isn't it, between the artist and the designer. The artist may think first and foremost about the ideas behind it, and then thinking, the designer might work with more aesthetics. But I usually start with sort of visualizing things through concept boards. So I'll put boards together that are about aesthetics or the narrative or the inspiration or the colour. And it just starts, it's the drawing then that comes from that, which is prolific. I'm a bit ridiculous with it. Know when to stop drawing is a top tip.
Great. Somebody has asked, thinking about our global need to consider the environment going forward, how do you engage with this in terms of what materials you use and processes?
Yeah, it's very, very important. Textiles is, I think it's the second or third most polluting industry on the globe, for the globe. So yeah, it's got to be an inherent thing that you think about. So at a studio level, the way in which I think about it is that, well, one, I want to produce high quality products that aren't consumable in the same way that other mass manufactured products might be. So we use water-based inks, we use linen fabrics that are made in Lancashire, so we know the provenance of them, we know sort of socially how they're made. I think sometimes often the question comes up when you're working with bigger companies who who develop the manufacture for you. I mean, it's about making informed choices about how they go about those things. So, IKEA are very forward thinking and proactive in terms of the sustainable approach to production and manufacture, and likewise John Lewis. And I think the decisions I make about who I collaborate with in terms of bigger brands are based on their past, or their current record rather, of how they're dealing with those things. But for me in the studio, it's about longevity and quality of the product, I think, and that it is almost a piece of art for the home that people can keep and look after and love forever, really. Sort of a timeless kind of approach to it.
Brilliant. So we're over time, but there's just a couple more themes coming out. If you
No, that's fine. I'm happy if everyone else is. That's fine.
Brilliant. So somebody asks how you actively try and balance commercial and more artistic projects. So I'm kind of interested to know, for anyone starting out in that way, how to ensure that they can maintain that balance and obviously do the work that need to do to pay the bills, but use that to be a point of experimentation as well, and how you've managed to do that so successfully in your career.
I think at first it wasn't like that. I think at first it was about using accessible everyday products to gain a response to my work and to gain maybe visibility. And then from that, I've sort of identified an importance in my practice to engage with bigger conversations, or I try to. I'm not saying that I'm doing this, perfectly, but I consider these things a lot. And I think it does come in time, being able to find the balance between kind of personal projects and sort of things that are accessible to people. But I think I think making and doing both to start with, but maybe using those sort of printmaking, editioned prints products as a way to engage, you know, and maybe raise funds to support the other aspects of your practice. And then down the line, I think what you might find, or I'm starting to find now just ever so slightly, that the balance is tipping in the other direction, and that, you know, the bigger projects are happening more frequently. I don't know whether that answered the question, sorry.
No, I think it does. Yeah, I think there's no fixed, you know, way of balancing both sides of the practice, but I think it comes with time and experience, as you were saying.
Yeah.
Okay, just a couple more things. Firstly, Hannah has mentioned she really likes the importance of how you link back to Yorkshire on your kind of roots. Have you found that lockdown has strengthened this connection to place, and has it led to any projects or prints that might have been missed otherwise?
It's interesting because I think Yorkshire's just sort of there all the time in a way because of my influence, but I've never actually just gone, yeah, this work's definitely about Yorkshire. I think in terms of lockdown, I've been much more creatively prolific. So I've just been image making a lot more. And I've been, like everybody, probably much more aware of like my immediate surroundings. And that happens to have been, you know, places that I've been for walks and things like that. But the way in which I've tried to capture it, or sort of contextualize it, has been through sort of more sensory approaches to things and trying to explore that a little bit, which I don't know whether it's worked or not, but you know, it's nice to have had the time to just have a sketchbook where this is like, oh, okay, so this is, how do I capture more sensory things, and what would that look like as an image? But I'm really proud that I'm from Yorkshire, and I'm very proud that I'm practicing from Yorkshire, and I've got to a stage where my practice is working and functioning really successfully, and I don't have to be in London, because I lived in London and it's an amazing city, but it's hard to start out there. And I think yeah, maybe I need to shout about Yorkshire a little bit more and celebrate it a little bit more.
Brilliant. So just really quickly, and then with this quick note, and then I'll move on to the last question. In terms of what you were saying just then about being based in London and starting out, so Gwen asks, how much time were you dedicating to your practice, you know, before opportunities like Heels came about? So was that something you were able to do full time, or were you balancing it with other jobs and so on?
No, I was balancing it with other jobs. So I do actually lecture 2 days a week at Leeds Arts University on the textile design degree there. And I've always had, well, usually a two-day a week job. So I was also a print technician at the art house in Wakefield. So I helped sort of kind of, you know, technically, and the technician did a bit of programming for that. So I kind of used that to up my knowledge in how organisations run and how funding applications go, and engaging with communities and diverse people. And, you know, I love people and I want to be around people, and I kind of, that's always been quite important to what I've done. And likewise, you know, I am still, although I don't do it as much at the moment, a creative practitioner at the Hepworth. So I've run a lot of printmaking workshops with galleries, and you know, continue to do that. So it's always been, there's always been something else going on. I mean, I do think I'm in the position now where I could, you know, I know I could go full time, but sort of engaging with people's become quite important. So I think that's a bit of a question mark at the moment.
Lovely. And I think we'll just have to move on to the final question, but
yeah.
I've lost it now. So Jenny has asked briefly, perhaps you can just sum up how you came to work with Morwenna Such a great collaboration. Just maybe a little bit about how that mentoring scheme was set up and how that came about and what led to your decision to carry on working together.
Okay, well, actually, I think one thing that I didn't say about myself and Moena is that we've established sort of this ongoing collaborative project. So I spoke to Moena a couple of weeks ago, and Moena is part of a collective called Into Art, who are based in Peckham. And so Moena has a studio there and works with sort of studio support to realise her ideas and her projects. The guys from Into Art saw my work actually in the shop at Nottingham Contemporary, and they kind of could see the connections between myself and Moena, and they approached me and asked whether I'd be willing to go in and work in very short, sharp bursts with Moena, just to sort of help her to make decisions about both product and also sort of textile lengths for London Design Festival. And again, it's about those relationships. So I keep in touch with the directors of Into Art and Moena, and we're actually chatting at the moment now. Lockdown is looking like it's lifting, about how we can pick something else up and what that will look like. Because I think the one thing that came out of the collaboration was how sort of creatively, what's the word? Well, it's just sort of exciting, rewarding. We both got a lot from it. We learned a lot from each other. We learned a lot about the process. We learned a lot about working with each other. And I think we just want to make more together. So yeah, I kind of try and keep in touch at the minute with Moena over Zoom when she's in the Into Art studio, and looking forward to going down to London when I can to see her and pick up the conversation about what we're going to do next, really.
Brilliant. Well, I have a bundle more questions. I'm sure everyone else does, but we'll have to save them to when we can see you in person, hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah.
Hopefully at another print fair or many other opportunities prior to that, at the gallery and your other exhibitions. So do keep us informed of those, and we can all check out your social media for updates. Yes, I just want to say thank you. It was an incredibly inspiring talk, so rich, so much gone into that. So thank you so much.
No worries. Thank you all for coming and listening.
Yeah, exactly. I'd like to know that too. Thank you to our audience and for so many great questions and comments in the chat. Lots of love coming through for you. So I'll this chat later, Laura. But yeah, great. And everyone, yeah, do check out the print fair if you haven't already. Laura has a profile on there where you can browse her full product range and make purchases from her and other makers. So yes, thank you very much. We'll say goodbye.
Yeah, thanks everybody. See you later. Take care.